Okay, this is the third of in a series that I'm doing on the second law of thermodynamics. This is part 3. In part 1, I showed had a video from Brian Cox, the physicist. He talked about sand piles, sand castles, and I equated that to Darwin's little pond to show that basically abiogenesis was impossible. So if you want to see that one, you can. Then the next one, I used a video clip from an atheist who claimed that basically that the second law of thermodynamics does not apply to the Earth because the Earth has the sun, so that the Earth is not a closed system. Although I refuted that claim in the first video, I also showed that the argument whether God exists based on the second law of thermodynamics had to do with the universe. The universe is one closed system. It's running down, and it does apply to the second law of thermodynamics, meaning that if the universe had a beginning, it had a beginner. And of course, that's the argument. It had nothing to do with the Earth system in the first place. It had to do with the universe being a closed system, and it's running out of energy, and everybody knows it. Nobody denies that. So in this third part, I'm going to cover a little bit more in depth on both ideas. You're going to see a video from a famous British scientist on the second law of thermodynamics, and he's going to start out with talking about the universe, and then he's going to bring in the evolution of all life on this planet. So without further ado, let's watch his little video clip on the second law.
Clausius was so confident about his mathematics that he figured out that this irreversible process was going on out there in the wider cosmos. He speculated that the entropy of the entire universe had to be increasing towards a maximum, and that there was nothing we could do to avoid this. This idea became known as the second law of thermodynamics, and it turned out to be stranger and more beautiful, more universal than anything Clausius could have imagined. The second law of thermodynamics seemed to say that all things that gave off heat were in some way connected together. All things that gave off heat were part of an irreversible process that was happening everywhere. A process of spreading out and dispersing. A process of increasing entropy. It seemed that somehow the universe shared the same fate as a cup of tea. In the end, there is no escaping entropy. It's the ultimate move from order to decay and disorder that rules us all. Boltzmann's equation contains within it the mortality of everything, from a china jug to a human life to the universe itself. The process of change and degradation is unavoidable. The second law says the universe itself must one day reach a point of maximum entropy, maximum disorder. The universe itself must one day die. If everything degrades, if everything becomes disordered, you might be wondering how it is that we exist. How exactly did the universe manage to create the exquisite complexity and structure of life on Earth? Contrary to what you might think, it's precisely because of the second law that all this exists. The great disordering of the cosmos gives rise to its complexity. It's possible to harness this natural flow from order to disorder, to tap into the process and generate something new, to create new order, new structure. It's what the early steam pioneers had unwittingly hit upon with their engines. And it's what makes everything we deem special in our world, from this car to buildings, to works of art, even to life itself. The engine of my car, like all engines, is designed to exploit the second law. It starts out with something nice and ordered, like this petrol, stuffed full of energy. But when it's ignited in the engine, it turns this compact liquid into a mixture of gases 2,000 times greater in volume, not to mention dumping heat and sound into the environment. It's turning order into disorder. What's so spectacularly clever about my car is that it can harness that dissipating energy. It can siphon off a small bit of it and use it for a more ordered process, like driving the pistons which turn the wheels. That's what engines do. They tap into that flow from order to disorder and do something useful. But it's not just cars. Evolution has designed our bodies to work thanks to the very same principle. If I eat this chocolate bar packed full of nice, ordered energy, my body processes it and turns it into more disordered energy, but powers itself off the proceeds. Both cars and humans power themselves by tapping into the great cosmic flow from order to disorder.
Okay, so the second law of thermodynamics. Heat will pass from a hot mug to a colder area. Flow of heat is a one-way process. Concentrated energy to dispersed energy. According to the video, we're headed towards maximum disorder in the entire universe. So again, he reiterates the fact that the entire universe is heading towards its own heat death. It is going from order to disorder, which, by the way, is obviously goes directly against evolution. Period. You're going from order to disorder, not the other way around. But according to the video, these are several of his own quotes. How does the video explain why we exist? Well, let's see. How did the universe manage? I like the way he uses that. How did the universe manage to create the exquisite complexity and structure of life on Earth? Contrary to what you might think. Well, of course it's contrary, because it's ludicrous to believe that the universe is nothing but a rock. Okay? A rock in space. And you're going to tell me that a rock in space is responsible for, quote, the exquisite complexity. That term exquisite complexity I like, but it doesn't go nowhere near to describe the unfathomable, still to this day, we've only scratched the surface on the cell, and it's the unfathomable complexity that's in the cell. Darwin's little pond story about how these simple chemicals come together and poof, you have life is nonsense of the highest order these days. It takes, I have a quote I think it's in the second video, talks about how a small cell requires 43 million protein molecules. Well, I also show that there's one chance in 10 to the 77th power, one chance in 10 to the 77th power that not even one small protein of 150 amino acids long would come together by chance mathematically. It's impossible. And now you want me to believe that 43 million proteins did that for the first cell? And how did it create the replication system? The replication system requires information in order for all that to happen. Where, my friends, did the 400 million lines of code come from to build the next cell? And so he says, contrary to what you might think. Well, you bet, contrary to what you might think. In order for the first cell to come about, you had to have something that was so complex, it's 1 billion times more complex than the space shuttle. And you want me to believe that that came about by chance. Nonsense of the highest order. And he says, one of the quotes is, precisely because of the second law of thermodynamics, great order gives rise to complexity. Again, nonsense of the highest order. You can say that all you want to, but you can't prove it. It says it's possible to harness this flow. Oh, okay. Well, let me step back a minute and say I could be wrong, but only in one regard here. It says it's possible to harness this flow from order to disorder to tap into the process. Well, yeah, it's possible to harness it, but who harnesses it? Look at his examples. Look at the example. He says, my car is able to tap into the process from order to disorder. Your car is not able to do a thing without the occupant who sits in it and drives it, etc. And even if you want to bring up, say a Tesla, well, where did the Tesla get its brains from? Brain or no brain? And then he uses, and every one of these guys do this. Of course, they bring up the steam engine engineers because they're the ones that developed the second law of thermodynamics. But where do steam engines come from? Brain or no brain? Where do cars come from? Brain or no brain? Where does the petrol come that drives the car? Brain or no brain? Where does the candy bar come that he eats in the video to propel his little body? Brain or no brain? Buildings. Where do buildings come from? Where do works of art come from? And yet, somehow, in his little brain, he can just wave. And these are his examples, not mine. And he's an evolutionist, and he can just wave all of that away, and then just say, life itself. The universe. It managed to create such exquisite complexity. How? How did it create such exquisite complexity? How did the first cell, first life come about? Where did the 400 million lines of code needed for it come about? Nonsense of the highest order. So guess what? Me believing that Jesus rose from the dead is way more reasonable than believing that, first of all, there is no God, there is no miracle worker, there's nothing out there to create all of this, and then all of a sudden, this stupendously, exquisitely, magnificently built little structure called the bacteria automatically somehow just poof came into existence, and yet it's a billion times more complicated than the space shuttle. Nonsense of the highest order. And why we throw out logic. Today, where do highly complex systems come from? We know where they come from. Brain. And even in his examples, he talks about something being able to tap into the process. Well, to be able to tap into the process, you had to have a brain to do that. But no, we just love to just throw out all logic and trample on it, and yet I can do the same thing he did. I can use his examples and say, okay, what gives rise to steam engines? What gives rise to cars? What gives rise to buildings? What gives rise to works of art? And by implication, see, his implication went the opposite direction. Well, my implication goes towards brain. And they're his examples, not mine. Okay? But he gives an unguided, undirected, mindless process somehow the capacity to do what we cannot do ourselves today. And here's the kicker. It's not getting better for the atheist. It's getting much worse. The complexity is getting greater and greater and greater and higher, and I can't say enough of it. It's getting way beyond what's possible by some unguided natural cause. No way. Today in 2021, what's more reasonable? An unguided natural process, or in the beginning, God said, let there be. And you bet that's the winner. The great disorder of the cosmos gives rise to its complexity. Nonsense of the highest order. But you can believe that if you want to, but don't look down on me for believing in God. A being that's from everlasting to everlasting, that can speak the word, and the universe leapt into being. And guess what? I have scientific proof that that happened in the second video. If you'll watch the second video, you'll see Alan Guth and Andre Lent talk about how the fact the universe went from size smaller than the smallest part of an atom to a size larger than the visible universe. And right now, I've got another video from Brian Cox that'll tell you the known universe today is 90 billion light years across, and it did that in a trillionth of a trillionth of a trillionth of a second. That's proof that the Bible's telling you the truth. And God said, and it leapt into existence. That's the truth. So, if I were to go to a distant planet, and I landed on the planet, and I found a watch, or a car, or a building, or a work of art, or a steam engine, I would assume one thing, and everybody else would too. It was put there by an intelligence, by a brain, not by no brain. And so why we throw out logic when it comes to biological systems, which are trillions and trillions and trillions of times more complicated, is beyond imagination. And to bequeath a mindless process with that ability is the height of stupidity. That's the truth. Thanks. Bye.